The air by the grave was thin and sharp, smelling of damp earth and cut flowers. It felt appropriate. Cold. Empty. Empty. They lowered the polished cherrywood casket into the ground, and I watched, my hands clasped in front of me, my knuckles white. I did not cry. My tear ducts had run dry sometime during the second decade of my marriage to Richard Vance. He had been a man who built empires and broke spirits with equal, meticulous skill. Mine had been the first he'd practiced on. Beside me, my son James sniffled a wet, performative sound. His wife, Sarah, squeezed his arm, her own face a perfect mask of tragic sympathy. She was an artist, my daughter-in-law. Her chosen medium was emotion, and today, her masterpiece was grief. She dabbed a silk handkerchief at the corner of an eye that was perfectly, immaculately dry. The service was brief. The minister spoke of a man I didn't recognize, a philanthropist, a community pillar, a loving husband and father. I wondered who he was talking about. The Richard I knew was a fortress, and his love was a toll you paid to exist within his walls. Back at the mansion, Richard's mansion, Neverars the air was thick with the scent of lilies and condolence casseroles. The house felt cavernous without his suffocating presence. It was the first time in 50 years I had breathed air that didn't feel recycled by his lungs first. Sarah glided to my side, her hand landing on my arm like a bird of prey. It was a gesture meant to look like comfort, but her grip was tight, her nails digging slightly into the sleeve of my black dress. "Mom," she began, her voice a carefully calibrated whisper, laced with a sweetness so synthetic it could give you a headache. "I know this is an awful time. Truly. But we have to be practical." I turned to look at her. Her eyes, usually so vibrant and hungry, were doing their best to feign gentle concern. It was a poor fit. "Practical?" I repeated, my voice flat. "The market," she said, her voice dropping even lower, as if sharing a secret. "It's unprecedented. A house like this. It could sit for years if we don't move now. We should list it. Strike while the iron is hot." James drifted over, drawn by the magnetic pull of his wife's ambition. He wouldn't meet my gaze. He stared at a point over my shoulder, at a portrait of his father that dominated the grand foyer. "Sarah's right, Mom. We need to secure things." He shuffled his feet, a boy of 45 trapped in a man's expensive suit. Dad's portfolio. His accounts. Was there anything left? The question hung in the vast, silent room. It wasn't a question of provision, of ensuring my comfort. It was a prospector's question, asking if the mine had finally been tapped out. This was it. The starting gun. The first domino. I let the silence stretch, watching them. I saw the impatience flicker behind Sarah's sorrowful facade, the twitch of avarice in James's jaw. I took a slow breath, letting it fill my lungs with the first taste of true freedom. "There's nothing," I said. My voice was steady, clear, a simple statement of fact, or what would become their fact. "There is nothing left." Sarah's perfectly painted smile faltered. What do you mean? "Nothing. I mean," I continued, meeting her eyes directly for the first time, "that Richard's last investments were a catastrophe. He leveraged everything. The stocks are worthless. The bonds are gone. The house." I paused, delivering the killing blow. "The house is mortgaged to the hilt. We're underwater. We have nothing." The change was instantaneous and breathtaking. Sarah's hand flew from my arm as if I'd burst into flames. The mask of concern didn't just crack. It shattered, falling away to reveal what lay beneath. It wasn't pity. It wasn't compassion. It was a visceral, reptilian shock. James's face went pale, his jaw slackening. He finally looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the raw, ugly truth. disgust. He was looking at me as if I were a failed investment, a liability he was suddenly stuck with. My husband was dead. My world had supposedly crumbled. And their first, their only, thought was for the money. The plan, born of decades of quiet observation and simmering resentment, had officially begun. I was no longer a wife. I was a weapon, aimed at the heart of my own family. The mansion sold in a week, or so, I told them. The buyer was a mysterious, faceless corporation, Vance Holdings, a name I chose for its delicious irony. A shell company, of course. My shell company. I was the architect of my own disappearance. From the sprawling 20-acre estate in Maple Creek's most exclusive zip code, I moved to a one-bedroom apartment on the industrial side of town. A place that smelled of diesel fumes and damp concrete. I'd bought the small, unassuming brick building 15 years ago with a sliver of an inheritance from my own mother, a secret act of defiance against Richard's total financial control. It was my lifeboat, and I was finally climbing aboard. The performance of poverty had to be absolute. I sold my designer clothes to a consignment shop, my jewellery to a pawnbroker, all documented with feigned reluctance for James and Sarah's benefit. I kept only my wedding ring, a symbol not of love, but of my long, silent sentence. The money from the sales went directly into a new account under a new name, Elizabeth Gray, a ghost. The apartment was sparse. A second-hand couch that smelled faintly of mothballs, a wobbly card table for a dining set, a mattress on the floor. To an outsider, it was a portrait of tragic decline. To me, it was a war room. Every piece of cheap furniture, every faded curtain, was a prop in the most important performance of my life. The calls from James and Sarah, once a daily duty, dwindled to a weekly chore. Their voices on the phone were tight with strained patience. "Are you eating enough, Mom?" Sarah would ask. The question a formality, not a concern. I could hear the tap-tap-tap of her keyboard in the background. She was multitasking her filial duty. "I'm managing," I'd reply, letting a little tremor of weakness enter my voice. "You look so thin in that picture you sent," James would chime in, his tone accusatory, as if my frailty were a personal inconvenience to him. "We told you about that meal delivery service. It's just, we're so swamped, Mom. The fallout from Dad's finances. It's a nightmare." Their visits were worse. They would stand awkwardly in the middle of my small living room, careful not to let their expensive coats brush against the peeling paint on the walls. Sarah would eye the chipped formica countertop in my kitchenette with a look of profound horror, as if it were a communicable disease. They never stayed long, just long enough to fill the duty box, to be able to tell their friends they'd checked on poor, destitute Elizabeth. But then there was Lily. My granddaughter was 17. She had James's height, but none of his weakness. She had my eyes, but hers were still bright with a belief in the goodness of people. She was the one crack in my armor, the one variable I couldn't fully control. She arrived every Saturday morning, unannounced, her worn backpack slung over her shoulder. It was always full. A carton of milk, a loaf of whole wheat bread, a small bundle of bananas. Things she bought with her own money from her part-time job at the local library. "Grandma," she said on her third visit, pulling a worn paperback from her bag. "I saw this at the used bookstore and thought of you." She didn't see the squalor. She didn't see the failure her parents saw. She just saw me. She would sit on the lumpy couch, telling me about school, about the boy in her chemistry class she thought was cute, about her frustrations with her parents. "Mom is being so weird lately," she confided one afternoon, her brow furrowed. "She's on her phone constantly, posting. I don't know, it's like she's trying to be famous for being sad." One Saturday, she arrived with a tablet computer still in its box. "I used my savings," she said, her cheeks flushed with pride. "So we can video chat. And I found this great budgeting app. Look." She sat next to me, her warmth, a stark contrast to the cold apartment, and patiently showed me how to track my spending. "We can make a spreadsheet, Grandma. We'll make sure you have enough for everything." Her concern was a knife in my heart. It was so pure, so genuine. She wasn't acting. She wasn't performing. She was my only link to a world of real affection, a world I was systematically cutting myself off from. As she showed me how to open a web browser, her fingers guiding mine on the cool glass screen, I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it almost made me gasp. I was using her. Her innocence, her love, they were becoming tools in my deception. She was my greatest hope. The one person who proved that not all love was transactional. And for that very reason, she was my greatest vulnerability. If James and Sarah ever figured out how much she meant to me, they would use her as leverage without a second thought. I had to protect her, even if it meant lying to her face. My quiet war had just found its one unacceptable potential casualty. Sarah's Instagram account became a masterclass in performative suffering. It was a digital shrine to her supposed martyrdom. The photos were always in stark, artistic black and white. A close-up of her hand, looking frail, wrapped around a coffee mug. The caption, "Some mornings, the weight of it all feels like too much, but you find the strength. For family. Asterisk. Vague. Evocative. Patently false." Another post. A blurry shot of her staring out a rain-streaked window, looking weary and pensive. "The hardest jobs are the ones you do for love. Not money. Taking care of those who once took care of you is a sacred duty, but a heavy one." Asterisk. She punctuated it with hashtags. Number family first. Number elder care. Number the hardest job. Number doing my best. The comments poured in, a deluge of sympathy from her thousands of followers, most of whom had never met me. "You are a saint, Sarah. Your mother-in-law is so lucky to have you. Sending you strength. It's so hard watching a parent decline. You are an inspiration. My heart goes out to you." Each comment was a small, sharp prick under my skin. She wasn't just abandoning me. She was curating a public narrative, painting me as a burdensome, deteriorating old woman and herself as the long-suffering, dutiful daughter-in-law. She was profiting from my feigned misery, building her brand on my back. Meanwhile, in the quiet of my drab apartment, I was becoming a student of the digital world, with Lily as my patient tutor. "This is Facebook, Grandma. It's mostly for old people now, so Dad still uses it," she'd explained, laughing. "And this is Instagram. That's Mom's kingdom." Under Lily's guidance, I created a ghost profile. No picture, a generic name, a digital shadow to watch them from. And watch, I did. While Sarah posted about her heavy burdens, James's Facebook page told a different story. A photo of them clinking champagne glasses at Auberge, the city's most exclusive French restaurant. The caption, "Celebrating this amazing woman. She gives so much of herself." Asterisk. The hypocrisy was so blatant, it was almost comical. Another photo, tagged by a friend. James and Sarah on a golf course, smiling, tanned, carefree. No sign of the crushing weight of elder care there. The real blow came not from their pages, but from a random dive into the depths of Twitter. Lily had shown me how to use the search function. On a whim, I typed in Patek Philippe and Maple Creek. A post from a high-end vintage dealer popped up, dated just 3 weeks after the funeral. It was a picture of a magnificent watch, its rose gold case gleaming against a black velvet cloth. Richard's watch. The one he wore every single day. The one he'd been given by his father. It was his most prized possession. The caption read, "An exquisite Patek Philippe Grand Complications, fresh to our collection. A true masterpiece of horology. Our deepest thanks to S. Vance for parting with this family treasure. Asterisk. S. Vance. I stared at the screen. My breath caught in my chest. The air in the room grew cold. The cheap furniture and peeling paint fading into the background. They hadn't just taken it. They had sold it. They had taken a piece of their father's history, a legacy, and converted it into cash for champagne and golf games. It wasn't about survival. It wasn't about paying off non-existent debts. It was a feeding frenzy. They were vultures, picking the carcass clean, not even waiting for it to grow cold. A memory flared in my mind, hot and clear. Richard, years ago, holding that very watch. I had admired it, reached out to touch it. He had pulled his wrist away, a small, sharp motion. "Be careful, Elizabeth," he'd said, his voice clipped. "You don't understand the value of things like this." He was wrong. I understood its value perfectly. And I understood the value of what my son and his wife had just done. They weren't just disrespecting their father's memory. They were erasing him. They were erasing me. They were building a public narrative of my incompetence, my financial ruin, my mental decline, to justify their own greed. It was a foundation of lies, a story they were telling the world to absolve themselves. A story I would one day burn to the ground, with them standing in the ashes. The quiet rage that had been simmering within me for years began to cool, hardening into something else. Something solid and cold and sharp. It was the beginning of a plan far bigger than simply faking my own poverty. The downsizing was my cover story. I just have too much of Richard's old junk, I'd told James on the phone, injecting a note of weary frustration into my voice. I've kept a storage unit for years. It's time to clear it out. I can't afford it anymore. "Just throw it all out, Mom," he'd said, his voice distant, preoccupied. No one wants that old stuff. But I wanted it. I needed to see it. The storage facility was on the edge of town, a place of corrugated steel doors and forgotten histories, Unit B-17. I slid the heavy metal door up, the screech of rusty rollers echoing in the concrete hallway. The air that rushed out was stale, smelling of paper and dust and time. It was the smell of a life I had almost forgotten. Richard's life. Before he was Richard Vance, the tech titan, the cold-hearted patriarch. The unit was filled with boxes, neatly labelled in his precise architectural handwriting. University texts, early drafts, journals, 1,970, 1,975. It was a museum of the man he was before he decided success required the sacrifice of his soul. I spent the day there, a ghost sifting through the remains of another ghost. I sat on the cold concrete floor and pulled out a leather-bound journal. I opened it, the spine cracking in protest. The pages were filled with his elegant script, detailing not stock options and corporate takeovers, but his dreams. He wrote about Le Corbusier and Frank Lloyd Wright. He wrote about creating spaces that could change the way people felt, homes that were more than just shelters. He wrote about a girl he'd met in an art history class. Me. The man in those pages was passionate, idealistic, almost gentle, a stranger. Where did he go? When did the dreamer get buried alive inside the tyrant? I found a large cardboard tube tucked away in a corner. Inside were rolled up blueprints, yellowed with age. I carefully spread one out on the floor. It was the original design for the mansion. Our home, his masterpiece. I knew the layout by heart. I had walked its halls for 50 years. But as my eyes traced the familiar lines of the foundation, something made me stop. Down in the cellar, behind the wall where the wine racks stood, was a space, a room. It wasn't large, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, but it was clearly delineated. It wasn't on any of the official city-filed blueprints I had copies of at home. I knew because I'd reviewed those documents countless times during Richard's many renovations. This was an earlier, private version. A secret. The room was marked with a single, cryptic symbol, next to the Dora circle with a vertical line through its center. It looked like the Greek letter phi. It meant nothing to me. But it was intentional, deliberate. Richard did nothing by accident. A cold dread, heavy and slow, crept up my spine. It was a different kind of cold from the one I felt when I thought of my children's betrayal. This was older, deeper. Richard was a man of secrets. Financial secrets, professional secrets. I had always assumed that. But this was different. This was a secret built into the very bones of the house. A secret he had lived alongside, just feet from where we slept, for decades. A secret he had never shared with me. His control, his paranoia, his need to dominate every aspect of his environment. It suddenly seemed to coalesce around this hidden space. What was in that room? Why was it hidden so completely? The questions echoed in the dusty silence of the storage unit. My son's greed and my daughter, Law's cruelty were a modern disease. Ugly and raw. But this felt like an ancient wound. I realized with a sickening lurch that my husband's biggest secrets might not have been buried with him. They might still be waiting, silent and patient, inside the walls of the home I no longer officially owned. My war had just opened up on a second front. It wasn't just about reclaiming my future from my children anymore. It was about uncovering the truth of my past. A past forged by the architect's ghost. I rolled up the blueprint, my hands trembling slightly. My next move was clear. I had to get back inside that house. I had to find that room. The phone call felt like a betrayal before I'd even dialed the number. Arthur Hayes. He'd been one of Richard's oldest friends, back from the days when they were both hungry young architects trying to carve their names into the city's skyline. I hadn't spoken to him in 20 years, not since Richard had cut him out after some forgotten professional slight. But I knew Arthur was discreet, and more importantly, he was a man who worked with his hands. He understood blueprints better than he understood people. Arthur, it's Elizabeth Vance. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint scratch of a workshop, the distant hum of a sander. Elizabeth, he finally said, his voice a low rumble unchanged by the years. I'm sorry about Richard. Thank you, I said, the words tasting like ash. I need a favor, a job. It's unconventional. I didn't have to say much more. I told him I needed to retrieve something sentimental from the house before the new owners started their renovations. Something Richard had walled up. The lie was simple, believable. People do strange things for sentiment. I offered him cash, a figure high enough to buy his silence, and low enough not to seem like a madwoman's ransom. He agreed to come the next day. No questions asked. Perhaps he held his own grudge against Richard. Or perhaps he just needed the money. It didn't matter. He arrived in a battered Ford pickup, his face weathered, his hands thick with calluses. He looked at the grand facade of the mansion with an expression I couldn't read. Was it nostalgia? Contempt? He carried a small, heavy toolbox and followed me down to the wine cellar without a word. The air grew cool and damp, smelling of earth and old wine. I ran my hand along the stone wall, the same wall I had passed 1,000 times. Here, I said, my finger tracing a line that was invisible to the naked eye. I handed him the faded blueprint I'd found in Richard's study. It was a copy, not the final version submitted to the city. A ghost plan. Arthur unrolled it on a dusty wine crate, studying it under the beam of his flashlight. He grunted. Richard always did love his little secrets. He took out a hammer and a small, fine chisel. He didn't smash. He tapped, a light, rhythmic, tink, 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 against the mortar. He was listening to the wall, feeling for the hollow space Richard's drawing had promised. For an hour, that was the only sound. A delicate surgical procedure on stone and mortar. My heart hammered against my ribs with each tap. What was I expecting? A safe? Jewels? Some final, insulting stash of cash he'd hidden from me. Then, a different sound. A dull thud. The echo was wrong. Shorter. Denser. There, Arthur said. He worked faster now, carefully removing stones, laying them aside as if he planned to put them all back. Behind them was not more stone, but plaster. He scraped it away, revealing the clean, sharp edge of a metal frame. An hour later, it was fully exposed. A seamless, flush-mounted steel door, barely distinguishable from the surrounding wall. There was no handle, no lock, no keypad, just a small, dark glass panel at its center. A biometric scanner, Arthur muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Fingerprint. Maybe retinal. Richard went all out. He looked at me. Well, Elizabeth, that's as far as I can take you, unless you've got his thumb in your pocket. His attempt at gallows humor fell flat in the cold, silent cellar. I didn't smile. I thought of Richard's paranoia, his obsessive need for control that apparently reached beyond the grave. He had built a fortress within a fortress. But he was a man of systems, of contingencies. And in every system, there is a fail-safe. There is always an administrator. My hand was trembling as I stepped forward. I thought of the 50 years I had spent as his wife, the administrator of his household, the keeper of his social calendar, the silent partner to his public-facing genius. I pressed my right thumb against the cool glass panel. For a second, nothing happened. My breath hitched. I felt a surge of foolishness. Of course not. Why would he grant me access to his deepest secret? Then, a faint red light scanned my thumb, top to bottom. A soft, electronic chime, impossibly loud in the silence. A heavy, satisfying clunk echoed from within the door as a magnetic lock disengaged. Arthur stared, his mouth slightly agape. "I'll be damned," he whispered. He made one hell of a mistake. No, I thought. It wasn't a mistake. It was arrogance. He never imagined a world where I would act without his permission. He had programmed me in as a failsafe, an emergency override, because he believed I was as predictable and controllable as one of his own machines. He never once thought I'd have a reason to open it. The heavy door swung inward with a low groan, releasing a gust of cold, sterile air that smelled of ozone and hot plastic. I paid Arthur, thanked him, and he left as quietly as he had come, leaving me alone at the threshold of my husband's last secret. The room was small, cold, utterly without personality. There was no furniture, save for a single, stark office chair positioned in the center. The far wall was a bank of humming computer servers, a web of blinking green and amber lights, and to my right a wall of monitors. 24 of them, arranged in a neat grid. They were on. Each screen showed a silent, black and white image. The living room, the kitchen, the master bedroom, my bedroom, the library, even the hallway outside. Silent, ghostly images of my home, empty and still. The cameras were active. The eye of Richard was still watching. He was gone, but his prison remained, fully operational. He was still recording. The cold of the room seeped into my bones, a chill far deeper than the air conditioning. This wasn't a vault for treasure. It was a cage for observation. For 50 years, I had lived in a gilded cage. Now I knew it was also a laboratory. I was the specimen. I couldn't make sense of the servers, the tangle of wires, the archaic-looking operating system on the main terminal. It was a language I didn't speak, But Lily did. Bringing her into this felt like a contamination, a desecration of the one pure thing I had left. But I had no choice. The alternative, walking away, leaving this tomb sealed, was unthinkable. The truth was in this room, and I would not be denied it. Not anymore. I brought her to the mansion the next day, using the excuse that I'd left some old photo albums behind. I led her down to the cellar, my heart a cold stone in my chest. She gasped when she saw the open door, her eyes wide with a teenager's fascination for the forbidden. "Whoa, Grandma. What is this? Is this Grandpa's secret spy lair?" The lie came easily, smoothly, polished by years of practice in keeping the peace. It was his security system, darling. Over the top, just like him. He said he kept backups of everything on it. I was hoping we could find some of the old home videos. The ones of you, when you were little. It was a perfect lie, because it was laced with a genuine desire. I did want to see those videos. I wanted to remember a time before all this. Before the rot set in. Lily's face softened. Of course, Grandma. She sat in the cold office chair, the one Richard must have sat in, and her fingers flew across the keyboard. She was a native in this digital world, fluent and intuitive. I watched her, a ghost in my own home, as my granddaughter hacked into my dead husband's surveillance archive. The air hummed with the sound of the servers, the quiet clicks of the keyboard, and my own ragged breathing. "Okay. This is weird," she said after a while, her brow furrowed. "The security protocols are ancient, but they're layered like crazy." He was really paranoid. She typed a rapid string of commands, her eyes darting across the screen. A progress bar appeared, bypassing master encryption. Almost there. After what felt like an eternity, the main monitor flickered, and a file directory appeared. It was a long list of dates, stretching back decades. Folder after folder, year after year. Lily clicked on a recent date. A grid of video feeds filled the screen, the same ones I'd seen on the wall of monitors, but now they were in color, and they had sound. "It's all here, Grandma," she said, her voice filled with a techie's pride. She pointed to a small icon on the screen. "Every room. Audio too. It looks like it recorded everything. 24/7. He must have used terabytes of storage. Every room. Audio too." The words hit me with physical force. Richard hadn't just watched us. He had recorded us. Every argument I'd had with him, in the supposed privacy of our bedroom. Every tearful phone call to a friend. Every whispered complaint under my breath. Every secret James had ever confided in his mother. Every frustrated sigh from Sarah. Every private conversation whispered within these walls was not private at all. It was all here. Catalogued. Archived. Stored. It was a monstrous violation. A complete erasure of a life's privacy that made my skin crawl. He hadn't just built a house. He had built a Panopticon, and we were the unwitting inmates. My entire marriage, my entire life as a mother, had been a performance for an audience of one. Lily scrolled through a few files, showing me how to access them. "See? You just click on the date, then the room. You can search by time code. It's all here. The videos of me should be in the folders from when I was born." She smiled, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "I'll leave you to it. Let me know if you find the one where I tried to feed spaghetti to the dog." She gave me a quick hug and left, her footsteps echoing up the stone steps, leaving me alone in the cold, humming heart of Richard's domain. I sank into the chair, my body trembling. This archive of my life was a profound defilement, a final act of control from a man who couldn't bear for anything to be unknown to him. But as I stared at the screen, at the list of dates, a new feeling began to crystallize through the horror. This was not just a tomb of secrets. It was an arsenal, a perfect, pristine, impartial record of the truth. Richard, in his obsessive, controlling paranoia, had given me the ultimate weapon, and I was going to use it. For days, I didn't leave. I had Lily bring me sandwiches and coffee, telling her I was having trouble finding the right files. The lie tasted fouler each time I spoke it. The cold of the room became my new reality. The low hum of the servers, a constant companion. I didn't search for home videos of a happy past. I started from the day of Richard's funeral. I sifted through the hours, the days since my poverty began, my eyes burning from the screen, my ears ringing from the headphones. I watched James and Sarah in the living room after the funeral, their faces not etched with grief, but with avarice. I heard their whispers about the value of the art, the timeline for selling the house. I listened as their phone calls to me became shorter, more strained. I saw Sarah on her laptop, no doubt crafting her social media posts about the sainted daughter-in-law caring for her tragic, incompetent mother-in-law. It was all there, a meticulous record of their contempt. And then I found it, a recording from the mansion's kitchen. The timestamp was from 2 weeks ago, late at night. They must have come back to the house for something. James was pacing, his face pale and slick with sweat under the harsh kitchen lights. Sarah was sitting at the island, scrolling on her phone, looking bored and irritated. "We have to speed this up, Sarah," James said, his voice a low, frantic hiss. "Speed what up?" she replied, not looking up from her screen. "The lawyers are filing the paperwork. It takes time." "No, you don't understand. It's not just about the inheritance," he snarled, his voice cracking. He finally stopped pacing and leaned over the counter, his hands gripping the marble edge until his knuckles were white. "You don't get it. Dad was blackmailing me." Sarah's head snapped up. Her expression shifted from boredom to sharp, focused interest. "Blackmailing you? Over what?" James let out a harsh, broken laugh. "A land deal. From years ago, when I was just starting out. It wasn't clean. I cut some corners, paid some people off to get zoning approval. It was stupid, arrogant. I thought I'd gotten away with it." His voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "But Dad found out. He always found out. He had a file, documents, bank transfers, proof, enough to send me to prison for fraud. He never used it. He just held it. It was his leverage, his way of making sure I always did exactly what he wanted." My breath caught in my throat. I pressed the headphones tighter against my ears. "His death doesn't mean it's gone," James continued, his eyes wild with fear. "He wasn't the type to just let something like that disappear. It's somewhere in his estate. In a safe, in a bank box, in the goddamn walls for all I know. I have to find it. I have to find it and destroy it before anyone else does. Before the estate lawyers, inventory, everything." Sarah was silent for a long moment, her calculating gaze fixed on her husband's crumbling face. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. My son's greed wasn't simple. It wasn't just about getting his hands on the money faster. It was driven by the pure, clawing desperation of a criminal trying to cover his tracks. He wasn't just trying to rob me. He was trying to save himself. Richard's control had outlived him, a poison still working its way through our family. I thought that was the bottom. The lowest, most venal truth. I was wrong. The bottom was much, much deeper. I couldn't stop. I had to know the rest. I kept watching, fast-forwarding through hours of silence and emptiness, hunting for their next conversation. I found it 3 days after the kitchen confession. They were in the library, the room where Richard used to hold court, surrounded by his leather-bound books and trophies. The mood had changed. James was still agitated. But Sarah was now the one in control. She was calm, poised, her voice like ice. "Your paranoia is going to ruin us, James," she said, her tone sharp and dismissive. "Running around the house like a panicked rat isn't a plan. It's a liability. There's a better way, a permanent solution." She pulled up a website on her tablet, turning the screen so James could see it. I leaned closer to my monitor, trying to make out the text. "Oregon's conservatorship laws are a joke," she explained, her voice a clinical, detached lecture. "We get Dr. Albright to declare her incompetent. We already have the groundwork. Her selling the house for nothing, moving into that hovel, it all paints a picture of someone who's lost her grip. Albright is on board. He owes me for... well, he's on board." James was staring at the tablet. "A conservatorship gives us control of the finances, Sarah. It doesn't stop her from talking. What if she tells someone about the file? What if she finds it herself?" "But that's not the last step," Sarah said, and a thin, cruel smile touched her lips. "That's just the legal key to the door. She could still talk. She could still be a problem." She zoomed in on the website she was showing him. My blood ran cold. It was a facility, a private, offshore, long-term care facility in a country with lax regulations. The pictures showed sunny beaches and smiling, vacant-eyed residents. "My friend from college, her family runs this place. They're discreet," Sarah said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "Once we have conservatorship, we check her in. It's for her own good, of course, to get the care she needs." She looked up from the tablet, her eyes locking with his. They were flat, empty, reptilian. And once she's there, they administer a chemical cocktail. Very gentle, untraceable. It mimics the symptoms of advanced dementia, confusion, aphasia. She'll be docile, compliant. Within a few months, she'll be unable to form a complete sentence. A living ghost. A living ghost. The words hung in the air of the cold, dark room. The hum of the servers seemed to grow louder, a predatory buzz. "No one will question it," Sarah concluded, her voice smooth as silk. "It's a sad but natural decline. We get control of everything. We can search the estate at our leisure, find your little problem and make it disappear." And she is silenced. Permanently. I stopped the recording. I couldn't breathe. The air in my lungs had turned to ice. This wasn't a plan to steal from me. It wasn't a plan to hide a crime. This was a plan to bury me alive. To erase my mind, my voice, my very existence, and leave my body behind as a shell, a convenient excuse for their control. They weren't just thieves. They weren't just criminals. They were monsters, cloaked in the skin of my own family. I sat there in the humming darkness, the silent, watching eyes of the cameras all around me. And I felt something break inside me. The last vestiges of the woman I was, the wife, the mother, the victim crumbled into dust. And in her place, something new and hard and cold began to form. They wanted a ghost. I would give them one. But it wouldn't be me. It would be them. I would become the ghost in their machine, the phantom that would haunt them, and I would pull their whole rotten world down around them. The game had changed. This was no longer about money or pride. This was about survival. The sound from the speakers was no longer a whisper. It was a pronouncement, a death sentence delivered in the calm, measured tones of my daughter-in-law. A private plane, a facility, a drug to turn me into a living ghost. The horror was no longer an abstract fear. It was a blueprint, a detailed architectural drawing of my own internment. The blood in my veins, which had run hot with anger, now turned to ice. A cold, hard clarity settled over me. Richard had built me a cage of gold and velvet. My children were building me one of concrete and chemicals. I would not be contained again. The next morning, I did not call my son. I did not call my daughter-in-law. I called a number I had kept stored for years, a relic from a charity board I'd once served on, a number for a woman who was spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. Anya Sharma. They called her the Shark. They said she didn't just win cases. She eviscerated her opponents, leaving nothing but bone and regret. Her office was in the Pearl District, a place of glass and steel that seemed a world away from the musty corridors of my life with Richard. The space was aggressively minimalist. A single black desk, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out over the sprawling city of Portland. There were no family photos, no personal trinkets. It was a room designed for one purpose: combat. Anya Sharma was younger than I expected, perhaps in her late 40s, with hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to sharpen her features. She wore a suit the colour of a storm cloud. She didn't offer me coffee or water. She just gestured to the chair opposite her, her eyes, dark and intelligent, already assessing me. "Mrs. Vance," she said. Her voice was like her office, clean and without unnecessary adornment. "Your message was brief. You said you had a problem of a sensitive and urgent nature. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I took the small, encrypted hard drive from my purse and slid it across the polished surface of her desk. This is the problem," I said, "and its solution." She inserted it into her laptop without a word. I had prepared 2 files, 2 audio clips isolated from the hours of surveillance. The first was James's frantic confession to Sarah about Richard's blackmail. The second was the recording of Sarah laying out her plan to have me declared incompetent and shipped off to a foreign facility. I watched Anya's face as she listened. Her expression, unreadable. She wore professionalism like a suit of armor. But I saw it. A subtle tightening around her jaw. A flicker in her dark eyes. Not of shock, but of something harder. Recognition. She listened to both recordings twice. The silence in the room when she finally removed her headphones was heavy, absolute. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled under her chin. "This is comprehensive," she said, the word hanging in the air. It was a lawyer's word for monstrous. "They plan to erase me," I said, my voice steady. "First my assets, then my freedom, then my mind. And you played your part perfectly," Anya murmured, a hint of something that might have been admiration in her tone. The grieving widow, overwhelmed and making poor decisions. You handed them the narrative they needed. She swiveled her chair to face her monitor, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "They are more ambitious than you think, Mrs. Vance. And faster." She turned the large monitor towards me. On the screen was a legal document, a filing with the Multnomah County Circuit Court, a petition for emergency conservatorship and guardianship. My heart, which had been beating with the cold rhythm of vengeance, stuttered. "They filed it yesterday afternoon," Anya said, her voice flat. "They're not waiting. They want to move before you can react." She scrolled through the document. The language was cold, clinical, and utterly damning. It was my life, twisted into a portrait of senility. It was all there. My erratic decision to sell the family mansion for a fraction of its market value to an unknown LLC. My paranoid delusions about being watched and monitored. A direct reference to the few times I had let slip my discomfort in my own home, now pathologized as a symptom of cognitive decay. My move to a squalid apartment, presented as proof that I could no longer manage my own welfare. They had even attached pictures of the small, clean apartment, photographed from angles that made it look cramped and dirty. The final pages were the most vicious. A signed declaration from Dr. Albright, our family doctor for over 30 years. A man who had patched up James's scraped knees and given Lily her first vaccinations. He wrote of my increasing confusion, my emotional lability, my significant cognitive decline. He recommended with solemn medical authority That immediate oversight be granted to my loving son and daughter-in-law to protect me from myself. Every lie was a brick. Every signature was the mortar. They had built a cage of paper and perjury around me. My charade, my brilliant test of their love, had become their primary weapon. I had loaded the gun, and now they were pointing it at my head. Anya watched me, her gaze unwavering. "They've constructed a perfect prison," she said. "Using the very bricks you gave them, the court will see a concerned family trying to save a vulnerable matriarch from her own poor judgment. They will see the doctor's report, the sale of the house, the small apartment, and they will see proof. The hearing is scheduled for Tuesday." I looked from the screen to her face. I had come here for a weapon. Instead, she had shown me my own execution order. For a moment, a wave of despair washed over me, so potent it threatened to pull me under. This was it. This was how it ended. Not with a bang, but with a judge's signature on a piece of paper. But then I saw the look in Anya's eyes. It wasn't pity. It was the look of a predator who has just spotted a flaw in her prey's defense. "They've built a cage," she said softly, a thin, dangerous smile touching her lips. "But they've forgotten one thing." "What's that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You've given them the cage," she replied, "but you still hold the key to the lock." That night, my small apartment didn't feel like a refuge. It felt like a war room. Anya had come back with me, forgoing her pristine office for my humble table. Take-out containers of Thai food sat between stacks of legal pads and a portable printer. The air was thick with the scent of green curry and the hum of an impending battle. The despair I'd felt in her office had been burned away by a cold, righteous fury. "They are arrogant," Anya said, pointing a plastic fork at me for emphasis. "They believe you are what they've painted you to be. Frail, confused, weak. They believe their own press. That is their mistake, and that is what we will exploit." How?" I asked. "They have a doctor. They have my own actions as evidence. What do we have? We have the truth," she said simply. "But the truth is a clumsy weapon in a courtroom. It needs to be sharpened. It needs to be aimed. We don't just refute their story. We let them tell it. We let them build their case, lie by lie, in front of the judge. We let them walk, with all the confidence in the world, directly into the trap." The plan she laid out was audacious. It was terrifying. It required me to go deeper into the role I had created, to become the woman they accused me of being. I would attend the hearing. I would appear confused. I would seem frail. I would let them, and their lawyer, and Dr. Albright, build the narrative of my decline, unchallenged. "And then?" I pressed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "And then," Anya said, her eyes glinting in the low light, "we burn it all to the ground." But there was a missing piece. The recordings were powerful, but they could be challenged. My son's confession about his father's blackmail was damning, but it didn't directly prove their plot against me now. Sarah's recorded plan was the core of it, but a clever lawyer could argue it was a private conversation, a moment of anger, not a concrete conspiracy. We needed something more. We needed something current, something irrefutable, that connected all the pieces. We needed them to confirm their intentions now, just days before the hearing. And for that, I needed my pawn, my beautiful, innocent, unsuspecting pawn. I needed Lily. The thought made me feel physically ill. Using her, lying to the one person whose love was unconditional, felt like a betrayal worse than any I had suffered. It felt like I was becoming them. "There's no other way, Elizabeth," Anya said gently, seeing the conflict on my face. "They have put you in a position where you must use their tactics against them. You are fighting for your life. Remember what they plan to do to you. She was right. I thought of the sterile room, the needle, the slow chemical erasure of my identity. This wasn't a game. This was survival. I called Lily the next day. I asked her to meet me for lunch at a small cafe, a place we both liked. When she arrived, her smile was a beacon of warmth in my cold, calculated world. She hugged me tightly. "Gram, are you okay? Dad said you were having a hard time." I forced myself to look vulnerable, to let my hand tremble as I reached for my water glass. "Oh, honey, it's a lot." I told her a version of the truth, carefully edited, a story designed to thread the needle between her love for me and her loyalty to her parents. "Your father and Sarah, they're worried about me, I know. But they're trying to take control of my finances. They think I can't manage things since your grandfather passed." I let a tear slide down my cheek. They want to make decisions for me. All my decisions. I saw the war in her eyes, the confusion, the doubt, the fierce protective instinct that was so core to her nature. "But why?" she asked, her voice small. "They said they just want to help." "I know that's what they believe," I said, choosing my words with the precision of a bomb maker. "But it feels like they're trying to put me in a box, Lily. I just need a little help. I need to know what they're really planning." Then I brought out the gift. A brand new smartphone, the latest model. "I know your birthday isn't for a few months, but I saw this and thought of you. A little early present from your gram." She protested, but I insisted. Her old phone was cracked and slow. This was a grandmother's love. A simple, extravagant gift. She couldn't know that Anya's tech consultant had spent 2 hours the night before installing a piece of software on it, a ghost program that was undetectable, and gave me the ability to activate its microphone and GPS from my own laptop anywhere in the world. As she beamed, transferring her data over, my stomach churned with guilt. She promised she would visit her parents that evening and try to talk to them, to understand what was going on. I told her that was all I wanted. That night, I sat in my small apartment, the lights off, my laptop open on the table. A simple interface showed me that Lily's new phone was at her parents' address. My house. My real house. My hand shook as I moved the cursor over the button that read, "Activate microphone." I clicked it. For a moment, there was only static. Then voices. Muffled at first, then clearer as Lily must have set her phone down on a table or a counter. It was James and Sarah. "Don't know why you're so nervous," Sarah was saying, her voice sharp, impatient. "Everything is handled. She's bringing Lily into it." James's voice was strained, high with anxiety. "Lily called me, asking questions. What if Mom told her something?" "Told her what, James?" "That she's a confused old woman who sold her mansion for pennies. That's our entire case. Let her talk. It only helps us." There was the clink of ice in a glass. "Honestly, you need to relax. It's all set. The hearing is Tuesday. It's a formality. Albright's testimony is airtight. Your mother will be on a private plane to the facility in Costa Rica by Wednesday afternoon." My breath caught in my throat. Costa Rica? They had a destination. "And the medication?" James asked, his voice dropping. "Albright gave me the prescription for the initial sedative," Sarah said, her tone dismissive, as if she were discussing a grocery list. "Enough to keep her calm for the flight. The staff at the facility will handle the long-term protocol." "It's done, James. By the end of the week, our problem will be gone, and we will have control of everything. Richard's real accounts, the properties, all of it. Now, stop worrying. You're being weak." A cold silence followed. I could picture the scene perfectly. Sarah, sipping her drink, her face a mask of cold resolve. James, pacing, twisting his hands, a man drowning in a mess of his own making. I moved the cursor and clicked stop recording. The file saved to my desktop, a small, neat icon holding the sound of my children finalizing the plan to bury me alive. The guilt I felt about using Lily was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a vast, chilling certainty. The final piece of evidence was secure. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was walk into the courtroom and play the part of the lamb. The courtroom was a box of beige walls and quiet dread. The air was cool and sterile, smelling faintly of old paper and industrial cleaner. James and Sarah sat at a table across the aisle from me and Anya. They didn't look at me. They had perfected their roles. Their faces were masks of strained, pious concern. Sarah dabbed at a dry eye with a tissue. James stared at his hands, his brow furrowed as if under the weight of some great, tragic burden. They were dressed for a funeral. Mine. The hearing began. Their lawyer, a slick man with silver hair and an expensive suit, stood and addressed the judge. He spoke in a smooth, sympathetic baritone, painting a heartbreaking picture of a family in crisis. He described a loving son and daughter-in-law, desperate to protect a vulnerable matriarch who was rapidly losing her grip on reality. He presented the sale of the house, my move into the distressingly modest apartment, as evidence of a mind in turmoil. Then, he called his first witness. Dr. Albright took the stand. He was the image of kindly authority, his white hair neatly combed, his voice gentle and full of clinical pity. He recounted my last several visits, twisting my grief and exhaustion into symptoms of cognitive decline. He spoke of my disorientation and memory lapses, things he had invented wholesale. He concluded with a solemn declaration. In my professional opinion, Elizabeth Vance is no longer competent to manage her own affairs. She is a danger to her own financial and physical well-being. A conservatorship is not just advisable, it is medically necessary. I watched him lie under oath, this man who had known me for decades, and I felt nothing but a profound, cold emptiness. He wasn't a person to me anymore. He was just another part of the mechanism. Finally, it was my turn. Anya helped me to the stand, my hand on her arm. I let my steps be slow, uncertain. I sat down heavily, avoiding the judge's gaze, looking like a woman already defeated. Their lawyer approached me with a patronizing smile. Mrs. Vance, can you tell the court why you sold your family home, a property worth over $12 million, for just $2 million? I looked at him, my expression blank. I mumbled, I was tired of it. It was too big. Too big? He pressed. Mrs. Vance, do you understand that you lost $10 million? Do you know what you could do with $10 million? I don't know, I whispered, looking down at my hands. It's all so confusing. He turned to the judge with a look that said, See? Asterisk. He was done. Now it was Anya's turn. She rose, her movements sharp and precise. She walked not to me, but to the judge's bench. Your Honor, she began, her voice cutting through the quiet room. My client, Mrs. Vance, has been painted as paranoid, confused, and delusional. Her son's petition claims she has fantasies about being watched. Her daughter-in-law claims she is incapable of rational thought. We have evidence that will speak directly to the true nature of this family's dynamics and the very real, very rational basis for my client's fears. Anya nodded to the court officer, who connected a small digital audio player to the court's sound system. A low hum filled the room. The first recording, Your Honor, is a conversation between Mr. James Vance and his wife, Sarah Vance, recorded inside the Vance mansion several weeks ago. James's head snapped up. His face, which had been a mask of sorrow, was now pale with shock. And then, his voice filled the courtroom. Frantic, terrified. He was blackmailing me, Sarah, Dad. For years. That whole offshore venture, the one that went bad. He knew I committed fraud to cover the losses. He had proof. He held it over my head. My entire adult life. I have to find it before anyone else does. I'll go to prison. A strangled gasp came from Sarah. James leaped to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Objection! That's illegal! You can't! He stammered, his eyes wild. His own lawyer tried to pull him back down, hissing, James, sit down. But it was too late. He had confessed. To the motive, to the crime, to the desperation that had driven him not to protect his mother, but to hunt for evidence to save himself. He collapsed back into his chair, a broken, sobbing man, his face in his hands. The perfect image of the concerned son had shattered into 1,000 pieces. The judge stared, his mouth slightly agape. The room was utterly silent, save for James's ragged breaths. Anya let the silence hang for a moment before she spoke again, her voice like ice. The blackmail my client's late husband held over his son is a tragedy for another day, Your Honour. The next recording is more pertinent to today's proceedings. It was captured 2 nights ago on a device belonging to the Vance's daughter, Lily. Sarah's head shot up. Her eyes locked on me, no longer filled with fake pity, but with pure, unadulterated venom. And then her own voice, cold and clear as a winter morning, filled the courtroom. It's all set. The hearing is Tuesday. It's a formality. Your mother will be on a private plane to the facility in Costa Rica by Wednesday afternoon. Albright gave me the prescription for the initial sedative. The staff at the facility will handle the long-term protocol. It's done, James. By the end of the week, our problem will be gone. As a collective gasp ripped through the gallery. It was a physical sound, a wave of shock and horror. The judge's face was a stony mask of disbelief and fury. Sarah's composure finally, completely cracked. She lunged to her feet, her face contorted in a terrifying snarl. Lies! She's a liar! She faked it! The old bitch faked it all! Her own lawyer looked at her, his face ashen, as if he had just seen a ghost. Her scream echoed in the silent room, a raw confession of her own guilt. Her eyes, wide with primal terror, met mine. In them, I saw not a daughter-in-law, not a family member, but a cornered animal, ready to claw its way out. The judge slammed his gavel down, the sharp crack lost in the rising tide of chaos. Order! Order in this court! But there was no order. There was only the beautiful, magnificent wreckage of their lies. The trap, so carefully built, so patiently awaited, had finally snapped shut. The courtroom noise was a physical thing, a wave of sound that hit me in the chest. Gasps, reporters shouting, the frantic clicking of cameras. It all blurred into a single, ugly roar. I saw Sarah's face, a mask of disbelief cracking apart into raw, screaming denial. James was worse. He didn't scream. He just deflated. The ambition, the arrogance, all of it bled out of him, leaving a hollowed-out man staring at the floor as the bailiffs approached. He looked up at me, just for a second. There was no anger in his eyes. Just a terrifying, bottomless confusion, as if he couldn't comprehend how the world he had built for himself had just been turned to dust. Anya put a firm, grounding hand on my arm. "It's done, Elizabeth," she said, her voice a sharp, clear note in the chaos. "They're taking them into custody. The DA will be filing the official charges within the hour." I nodded, but my head felt strangely light. Done. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. The bailiffs were gentle but firm, leading a sobbing Sarah away. James went without a fight. his shoulders slumped in a posture of utter defeat. I watched them disappear through a side door, my son and the woman who was my daughter, and I felt nothing. A cold, clean, terrifying void. The victory I had planned with such meticulous, burning rage tasted like ash in my mouth. The press swarmed us as we left the courthouse. Microphones were shoved in my face. Lights flashed, blinding me. "Mrs. Vance, how does it feel? Was this revenge for the money? Did you know about your son's fraud all along?" Anya was a shield. "No comment," she repeated, her voice like steel, carving a path for us through the human wreckage. We finally made it to her car, the doors closing, with a solid thud that shut out the world. The silence inside was sudden and absolute. I stared out the window as we pulled away, watching the courthouse shrink in the rearview mirror. It looked like a tomb. "The district attorney is very grateful," Anya said, her eyes on the road. "Richard's files gave them everything they needed on James's old partners. It's bigger than we thought. They're looking at federal charges for him. As for Sarah, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, assault, she's not getting out of this. Her entire online brand is toxic waste by now." I knew she was right. I'd already seen the first tremors online. Before the hearing was even over, Lily had texted me a screenshot. Number Vance villain was trending. Not number justice for Elizabeth. Not survivor Vance villain. They were painting me as a cold, calculating monster, a vengeful matriarch who lured her own children into a trap and then slaughtered them for public consumption. They didn't see the years of abuse, the suffocating control, the perverse plot to turn me into a living ghost. They just saw the end. A mother destroying her own. "Where to, Elizabeth?" Anya asked gently. "Home," I said, the word feeling alien on my tongue. The mansion was just as I had left it, but now the silence wasn't a comfort. It was a presence. It filled every room, every hallway. It was the sound of my complete and utter solitude. The staff had been given paid leave, per my instructions. It was just me. Alone in the gilded cage Richard had built, a cage I had just fought a war to claim as my own. And now that I had it, I didn't want it. I walked through the cavernous living room, my footsteps echoing on the marble floors. I ran a hand over the cold, polished surface of the grand piano. Richard had insisted we buy it. Not because I played, but because a house of this stature should have a grand piano. It was a prop, just like I had been. For days, I drifted through the house like a ghost. I'd find myself standing in James's childhood bedroom. The wallpaper was still the same, a faded pattern of baseballs and bats. I remembered him as a little boy, so full of life, so desperate for his father's approval. An approval Richard gave and took away like a cruel god. Did that excuse what James had become? Number. But it was a part of the story, a part that hurt to remember. I went into the kitchen. It was a state-of-the-art monstrosity, all stainless steel and granite. I remembered Sarah's first time here, after she and James were married. She'd been so nervous, so eager to please. She'd tried to make me her signature lasagna. It was terrible, but I'd eaten every bite because I saw the hope in her eyes, the hope that we could be a family. When did that hope curdle into a plot to have me drugged and abandoned? When did the desire for a mother-in-law's approval get replaced by a scheme for my fortune? I found myself in Richard's study, the place where he had ruled our lives. I sat in his huge leather chair, the one that always made me feel small. On his desk, a single framed photo remained. It was of the three of us, Richard, James, and me, taken 20 years ago on a trip to Italy. Richard stood in the centre, a proprietary hand on my shoulder. James stood slightly apart, a forced smile on his face. And I, I was looking away from the camera, my expression distant, already somewhere else. We looked like a family, but we were just three strangers, bound together by a name and a bank account. The phone rang one afternoon, the sound so jarring it made me jump. I looked at the caller ID. An old number, a name from the Maple Creek Garden Club. I let it ring and ring. Then curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up. Elizabeth. Darling, it's Martha. I just heard. My God. It's all over the news. Are you all right? Her voice was syrupy with concern. I'm fine, Martha, I said, my tone flat. It's just so shocking. Your own children. I mean, we all knew Sarah was a bit of a social climber, but this? And James. Richard must be spinning in his grave. To throw it all away. For what? Did you ever suspect? The questions were not born of concern. They were born of a ravenous hunger for gossip. She wanted details. She wanted to be able to tell the other ladies at the club that she'd gotten the inside story. I have to go, Martha, I said, and hung up before she could reply. I was a spectacle, a local tragedy. The rich old widow who had her children arrested. They couldn't see the truth. They could only see the rubble of a prominent family. And I was the one holding the detonator. Anya came by a week later. She found me in the conservatory, staring at a collection of orchids that were starting to wilt. You need to water these, she said, touching a dry leaf. I know, I replied. I keep forgetting. She pulled up a wicker chair and sat opposite me. She didn't press. She just waited. The arraignment was yesterday, she finally said. James pled not guilty. Sarah's lawyer is trying to build a case that she was manipulated, that she was under duress from James and suffering from some sort of, I don't know, postpartum delusion, even though her kids are in high school. It won't work, I said. The recordings are clear. It was her plan, her voice, her words. I know, the DA knows. But it's the narrative they'll push in the media. The desperate, misguided mother trying to protect her family versus the cold, unfeeling matriarch. They're going to try to destroy your character, Elizabeth. There's not much left to destroy, I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. I'm already number Vance villain. Anya looked at me, her expression serious. What are you going to do now? With all this? She gestured around her. At the silent, opulent house. You won. You have your freedom. You have your fortune. What comes next? Her question hit me harder than any reporter's, Bronand. What did come next? I had spent months focused on a single goal, survival and justice. The fight had consumed me, given me purpose. Now, the war was over, and the silence on the battlefield was deafening. I was the victor, standing alone in a kingdom of ghosts and bad memories. I don't know, I admitted, and it was the most honest thing I'd said in a week. That night, Lily called. Her voice was a lifeline in the suffocating quiet. Grandma? Are you okay? I saw the news. It's awful. What they're saying about you. I'm fine, my love. I lied. No, you're not, she said, with the simple, brutal honesty of youth. You sound tired. Are you eating? Tears pricked my eyes. It was such a simple human question. In the midst of this grand, operatic tragedy of fraud and conspiracy and betrayal, my granddaughter wanted to know if I was eating. Not much, I confessed. I can bring over some soup, she offered. Mom's. Sarah's. She's not here. I'm at a friend's house. I can sneak away. No, Lily. Don't. It's too complicated. You need to stay away from this mess. The thought of her being dragged further into the media circus was unbearable. But you're alone, she whispered, her voice cracking. I know, I said softly. But I'll be all right. I promise. After we hung up, I walked to the large bay window in the dining room and looked out at the manicured lawns. The price of my freedom was the complete annihilation of my family. I had won my life back, but in doing so, I had confirmed the town's darkest suspicions. I wasn't the victim who fought back. I was the monster who devoured her own young. I was utterly, completely alone. And in that moment, looking out at the empire Richard had built, and that I had just reclaimed, I knew I had to tear it all down. Every last brick. The for sale sign on the front lawn felt like the first breath of fresh air after years in a sealed room. It wasn't just the mansion. It was everything. Richard's tech company with its insidious surveillance software was the first to go. I sold it to a competitor who, ironically, specialized in digital privacy advocacy. They planned to dismantle its core technology and use the patents for defensive purposes. There was a certain poetry in that. The art, the cars, the portfolio of stocks designed for control rather than growth, all of it was liquidated. Each sale felt like severing a chain. I wasn't just selling assets, I was exercising the ghost of Richard Vance, one stock certificate and one title deed at a time. Anya handled the legal intricacies, her firm working with a team of financial advisors who were both bewildered and impressed by my scorched earth approach. "Are you sure about this, Elizabeth?" Anya asked one afternoon, sitting across from me at a makeshift table in the nearly empty dining room. The echo was even more pronounced now. "You could live like a queen for 10 lifetimes on this." "I don't want to be a queen," I told her, signing another document without reading it. I trusted her completely. Queens live in castles. I'm done with castles. The final piece was the house itself. It sold to a developer who planned to subdivide the property into smaller, more sensible lots for families. The thought of children playing on the lawn where Richard once plotted and schemed brought a grim smile to my face. Let them build something new, something happy. The change in seasons mirrored my own. The last of the legal battles finished as the autumn leaves fell, painting Maple Creek in shades of gold and rust. James took a plea bargain, his sentence significantly reduced in exchange for his testimony against his former partners. Sarah's trial was a brief, humiliating affair. The recordings were undeniable. She was found guilty, her influencer world imploding in a spectacular supernova of public shame. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. I read about it online. Another headline in a story that was already fading from the public's memory. By the time the first snows of winter began to dust the bare trees, my old life was gone. It existed only in bank statements and legal documents. The money, a staggering sum, sat in a newly established trust. It felt abstract, unreal. It wasn't my money. It was Richard's, and I couldn't bear to touch it for myself. It was Lily who gave me the answer, without even knowing she was asking the question. We were having lunch at a small, anonymous diner miles from Maple Creek. She was picking at her fries, her expression troubled. "I've been thinking," she said, not looking at me, "about all those recordings. Dad. My dad. He wasn't the only one, was he? Richard did that to everyone." "Yes," I said quietly. "He did." "It's not right," she said, her voice full of a fierce, youthful indignation, "for someone to have that much power over you, to watch you when you don't know it. And what happened to you, Grandma? What they tried to do, that's not right either. People shouldn't have to be afraid of getting old. They shouldn't have to be afraid of their own families." Her words hung in the air between us. Asterisk. It's not right. People shouldn't have to be afraid. Asterisk. And just like that, I knew. The purpose I had been searching for clicked into place. The Lily Vance Foundation was born not in a boardroom, but in that cheap vinyl booth. I named it for her, for the one person whose kindness was a beacon in the darkest night of my life. When I told her, she cried. But Grandma, she said through her tears, I didn't do anything. You did everything, I told her, taking her hand. You reminded me what it felt like to be loved without condition. That's worth more than all of Richard's money. Our mission was twofold. Born from the two great betrayals of my life. We would fight to protect the elderly from abuse, neglect, and the kind of predatory legal maneuvering Sarah and James had attempted. And we would champion the cause of digital privacy, funding technology, and legislation to prevent the kind of Panopticon Richard had built in our home. It was a new blueprint. Not for a house, but for a legacy. My legacy. The cool, salt-laced wind whipped my hair across my face. 6 months had passed since the sale of the house. The air here, on this windy bluff overlooking the Pacific, was clean. It tasted of freedom. The ocean stretched out before us, a vast, churning expanse of blue and grey, indifferent and beautiful. Lily stood beside me, her hand tucked into the crook of my arm. Her presence was a quiet, steady warmth against the chill. We weren't looking at the waves. Our attention was on the hood of my modest, practical car. Spread across it, held down by a few smooth stones, was a set of blueprints. The paper fluttered and snapped in the wind. These weren't plans for a mansion. There were no grand foyers or cavernous ballrooms. The lines were simple, elegant, and functional. They depicted a series of small, interconnected cottages, a central community building with a large kitchen and library, and wide, accessible pathways. This is going to be our first project, I said, my voice raised slightly to be heard over the wind and the crashing surf. A community shelter. Not a facility. A home for people who have nowhere else to go. A place where they can be safe. Where no one is watching them. Lily leaned over the plans, her brow furrowed in concentration. She traced a line with her finger, her expression serious. She had a good eye, a natural sense for space and flow. I saw a glimmer of the architect in her, too. She pointed to an empty green space between the central building and the cottages. What about an open garden here, Grandma? She asked, looking up at me. A place where people can grow things. Flowers. Vegetables. Something to take care of. I looked from her earnest, hopeful face to the space on the blueprint. An open garden. A place for things to grow. Life. Hope. It was a perfect idea. A genuine smile spread across my face. Not the tight, brittle smile of Elizabeth Vance, wife of Richard. Not the weary, pained smile of Elizabeth Vance, mother of James. This one was mine. It felt real. It felt warm. I think that's a wonderful idea, I said. I looked back out at the endless horizon. The ghosts of Maple Creek were finally silent. The weight of the past was gone, sold off and repurposed. I was no longer defined by the men who had tried to control me. I was not Richard's wife. I was not James's mother. I was Elizabeth, and for the very first time in my long life I was the architect,